Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel, My Life in Scrubs. I'm Stacy. I'm a registered nurse. I've been in healthcare for 28 years and I like sharing my nursing experiences and my journey to becoming an RN and tips and tricks that have helped me get through my day. Um, I had a request to talk about times when I've dealt with death. Without violating any HIPAA, I'll talk a little bit about some experiences that I've had with death throughout my career. When I was a CNA, I was 19, and that is the first time that I saw a dead body that wasn't my family member in a casket and um, I had to help do postmortem care. So I remember the patient passed on night shift, and it was scary to me to go in and handle a dead body. What are some things that you guys do when you're working on a shift concerning death practices, superstitions, beliefs? I know in long-term care, when a person is at the end of their journey, sometimes we'll tie a knot in the corner of their sheet so that they won't die on our shift. And oddly enough, sometimes that does work. It does. You can knock it, but you should try it. Nobody wanted to be the person who had the person die when I was younger. Another thing that was common that we did was when a person died, we would open the window to the room so their spirit could get out. I don't know, that's just something that we did every time someone died. We would do postmortem care. The first time it was scary to me to move a dead body, and sometimes when you're turning people, they will make breathing sounds or air will come out of their body, they'll pass gas, their bowels or their bladder will empty, and it's a little bit disconcerting to do postmortem care for the first time. And I remember I just felt weird about it, and you start to learn to understand what a person looks like when they're gone. The first time it happens, you're really not sure that really happened, but you do give them the same care that you would give them if they were alive and you were providing a bed bath. So that's kind of what postmortem care is. It's like a bed bath, and we bathe them just as if they were alive and change them, put clean clothes on them and put clean linens on them, and await the funeral home to come and transport them. I've worked in facilities where all the staff members would stand by the door to say goodbye to the patient and honor them when they were gone. And that was very beautiful and emotional because, as I've talked about, when you work in long-term care, you do kind of develop an attachment and a rapport with your patients and their families. Other things that have happened is we had a hospice room in a facility that I worked in when I was an LPN, and so several people died in that room. And one night I went into that room. We were making beds. On night shift, sometimes we would make beds and prepare the room for an admission that might be coming the next day. There's no housekeeping on night shift, so the night shift staff is responsible to, strip the beds and make them up. If there's something happening, we would know. And when we walked in this room, I don't know why we were even all in this room. Nobody was in this room at the time, but we called this our hospice room. And the hair on my arms stood up. It was the most eerie feeling I've ever felt. And when you work night shift in a long-term care facility, it's kind of scary at night sometimes. The hallways are dark, and I don't know. I'm a spiritual person. I believe in the afterlife. I believe in spirituality, and I believe in, the possibility of things happening spiritually. So a lot of times at night, there would be rooms that nobody was in, and call lights would go off and be going off, and there would be no patient in there. And you just, sometimes when you're walking down the hall, you hear noises, and it's dark at night, and it's scary, especially when you're a teenager and it's your first time dealing with all that stuff. We had this really cool nurse though. Her name was Hope. I got to talk about Hope. She would play tricks on us sometimes if it was a slow night, and she also did her rounds. She wanted to check if you were changing the patients, and she would pour water on the pad. Not on the patient, but on the pad where the patient was. And she would check if you changed that pad. And if she found that pad with water, she would write you up. But also, one night she was in an empty room and put the call light on and was under the bed. She was under the bed. And this is, gosh, like I said, I was young at this time. I was still a CNA. I was a CNA under this woman, and I also worked with her as a nurse when I became a nurse. But when I was a CNA, she was hilarious. She got up under the bed, she turned the call light on, and when the CNA came into the room, she grabbed their leg. And I know the CNA didn't pee her pants, but I'm pretty sure that she wanted to, because she grabbed her leg under the bed. So we had a little prankster among us at night, but I think that she was such a serious, straight and narrow nurse. It was totally out of character for her to do that, and she would throw you off because she would do something crazy sometimes. And one time she pretended to call and be a police officer and asked for me on the phone and told me that I was in trouble. But I wasn't in trouble. I knew I wasn't in trouble, but it was a scary call. And then Hope was laughing at the nurse's station. So I remember her. I will never forget her. She was a great nurse. She was a great nurse, and she probably did it forever. She was a nurse a long, long time. She was a veteran nurse by the time I worked with her as a nurse. And when someone dies in a nursing home, the nurse has to bring another nurse, and they have to check if the patient has a pulse or if they have vital signs, if they're breathing. They have to listen. They have to, check that for a full minute to see if there's any heartbeat at all. And it takes 2 nurses to verify. And once they do that, then they call the doctor and let the doctor know, and then they call the coroner and get permission to send the patient to a funeral home in a nursing home. If a person's on hospice, we call hospice in a facility setting, and the hospice nurse comes and does the pronouncing. Sometimes the patients have family members at the bedside, and then you have to provide that postmortem care with the family at the bedside, and they're sad. I did have an experience with a patient, and it just tugged at my heartstrings. It wasn't my patient. I was just helping the nurse because I was the RN on shift, so I had to verify that the patient was indeed deceased, and she was on hospice, and her husband laid over her and cried, and I think that was my first experience with grief that powerful. He could not believe that she was gone. He wanted us to just check again and check again, and it was it was a long time ago, but it stuck with me all these years to see the love that he had for his wife after all those years of marriage. And I thought to myself, I sure hope somebody misses me like that or loves me like that whenever it's my time, that they love me like that, because he was devastated when she died, and they had been married beyond 50 years. And he made us get a mirror to make sure that there wasn't breath, because she made him promise that when she died, that he would make sure she was truly dead. She had a fear of being taken while she was alive. So he made us get a mirror so that he could make sure she didn't have any breath on the mirror. And I just remember how much they loved the nurse that gave her daily cares, and how much the nurse loved those people. And it was just a really sad day. And then, there's times whenever you see something. We had a husband and wife that were together. Again, I was in my 20s back then. There was a husband and wife that had a room together, and when his wife died, he died 24 hours later, and so the family ended up having to do a double funeral, and he wasn't showing any signs that he was going to be dying. I mean, his wife was ill. We expected her to pass, and then the husband died. It was something out of The Notebook, but The Notebook wasn't even a movie then. Like, that wasn't even a thing. But they both died within 24 hours of each other and got buried together on the same day. So that was a really touching story too. I think one of the most traumatic things that happened to me when a person died, and it's happened to me later in my career, and it doesn't scare me as much now, but it does make you question yourself. I had a patient who had died, and her family was present, and the patient had died, but the body still looked like it was breathing, and it was traumatic for the family because the patient had no pulse, there was no air movement with the movements of the chest, but it looked like there was breathing, and it was a muscle thing. But I was really still pretty young when that happened, and I had never seen anything like that. That I was scared to call the funeral home, and I wasn't the only nurse that verified the patient didn't have any vital signs, but just like I've had patients who have that fear that we're going to send them when they're not deceased, I don't want to ever be at risk to send somebody who isn't really deceased. I think that, the funeral home doesn't come right away in those situations. So eventually that spasm did stop, and the patient was on hospice, and it was an anticipated death. But it was very traumatic for the family. There was a lot of crying because the patient looked like they were breathing and they were gone. That's like the crazy things that have happened to me. And then I've had patients who seemed perfectly normal and passed in the middle of me giving them care. And I'd say that's traumatic to me to have had people die while I was turning and repositioning them. Sometimes whenever you're caring for a person that's at the end of their life, they will die while you're providing care, or sometimes they will die when everybody leaves the room. That's a common theme. People will stay at the bedside vigilant for days, so that they can be with their loved one at the end of life for those last moments. And then finally, they've been there for several days. They haven't had a shower. They're hungry. They want to eat a meal, and they'll go and take a shower, and their loved one will die when everybody leaves. And I don't know why that happens, but I see that a lot of times where a patient will wait until nobody is in the room from their family to be with them, and they will expire. I know when it's your time to go, it's your time to go, but sometimes it does happen that way, where a person's going on for days and days and days. And then another thing that I've noticed about death is that it seems like everybody always has some sort of checklist going on, something that needs to happen before they will let go of their life. I know it's your time when it's your time, but it seems like people will be waiting for one person to show up. I've had those experiences where I've seen patients who are waiting for that one family member to get there, and the second that family member gets there, they go. I don't know what's happening behind the scenes. Do you ever wonder what's happening behind the scenes when somebody's dying, what they're really seeing? Because we see people reaching, we see them talking, and I've actually been present in hospice situations where families were very spiritual, and they would say things like, the patient's not in their body anymore, they're just waiting to go. And like I had an experience where a psychic was present, or a reader was present at a patient's home when they were getting close to death, and the patient was no longer verbal. The patient didn't have any ability to communicate anymore, and that psychic was the person who had said to me that the patient was no longer in their body anymore, that they were hovering above. And I've had patients who seem like they're at the end of their journey, and you don't know what's keeping them alive sometimes. And like I said, when that one family member shows up, then they do pass peacefully, usually. It's like they need to see that one person. A lot of times, if a person's going on for weeks and weeks, we'll say to the family, is there somebody that they are waiting for? And sometimes the family will say, I think it's so-and-so. And so-and-so will come, and the patient will then go peacefully. But I have seen patients who talk to the corner of the room, and they're like, no, I'm not coming. And clearly we can't see what they can see when they're at the journey's end. And I truly believe there is a spiritual component to it. I believe that this is just a house. So I believe that, some people just aren't ready to leave their house and go on to the next journey. And they really will fight it. I've seen people that have a very peaceful death, and I've seen people that just, no matter what you do, they're not comfortable. And that's always a disturbing experience. I've seen people that no matter how much comfort you try to give them, they're just not comfortable and they can't get comfortable. And they are still going to pass whether they're comfortable or not. But I would much rather see somebody pass in a comfortable manner. I have also seen deaths where the family is surrounding the patient and honoring those spiritual beliefs and honoring the patient's wishes. You know, I've seen situations where it was a quiet, peaceful, playing music, spiritual experience, and the patient never exhibited any symptoms of discomfort. And I think sometimes when a patient has that much love and that much care and spiritual respect, that sometimes those kinds of deaths, in my opinion, are a very beautiful thing to be a part of. And then, of course, you know, as healthcare professionals working with people in populations that are at the end of their journey, whether they be young or old, sometimes we do have those unexpected deaths, and those are the hard ones where you find someone who died that you didn't expect them to die. I think I have always said that I didn't want to be the person taking care of young people that were at the end of their journey, because I think that's too emotional for me. I have experienced and encountered younger people at the end of their journey who have special requests at the end of their life. And it's very hard for family members to lose someone that's young. I've seen parents, you know, who have children that are still underage, that are at the end of their journey. And I can't imagine what it would be like to lose your mom or your dad when you're not even old enough to drive yet. I'm so thankful that I didn't experience that, but those are the times as a nurse when you find it hard to sometimes hold it together and be professional. You know, as nurses, we are supposed to be the support and the comfort for our patients when they are at that point. But I have really had to walk away from a unit or a room or a house and spend some time in my car collecting myself after some of those situations, because I think also there's times when you're taking care of people that are dying that you ask yourself, what is the point of life? You know, because when you see young people die, it kind of makes you angry. It can make you angry sometimes. I think as nurses that we go through the stages of grief too. It's not our family member. We're not invested in it the way they are, but it makes you angry when you see a young mother die and leave her children without a mother. It makes you angry because you don't understand why things like that could even happen, right? And when you see a young person die that's young enough to be your child when you're my age, it makes you angry because you don't understand why a young person would have to die, why they couldn't have lived their life and experienced their life fully. But then I think too sometimes that some of those people that have been ill a long time and are at the end of their journey, even when they're young, have experienced a lot of life that we can't understand, because we didn't live in that body that was having pain and having to deal with those symptoms that they had to deal with. And sometimes those people are ready to go when they go. And I think those of us who keep on living in that type of situation wonder why. So I'm a nurse that deals with death on a day-to-day basis. And generally I'm able to see the benefit of having a death the way that you would like to have a death, right? I believe that you should be able to die comfortably in the comfort of your home if that's possible for you and that's what you want. But again, death is very serious. It's a very important part of the living process. Dying is a very important part of the living process. And sometimes it doesn't happen in the time frame or on the time schedule, of course, that we think that someone should die. And I've realized over the years too that it doesn't matter how old or how young someone is, nobody's ever ready to lose their loved one. They're not ready to say goodbye, whether somebody's 102 or whether somebody is in their teen years. And so I think it's really important to talk about death, to talk about the experience of death. I think it's something that shouldn't be taboo. I think people should absolutely talk about it and have it as a part of their conversations. I wish that more families would be open to discussing the reality of what's happening in a death and dying situation. I think that's a hard thing for families to digest, that they're losing someone. When you talk about the end of life and you know that someone's dying, it's a hard thing to digest that somebody's going to die. So I wish that there was a more open conversation about death where it wasn't a subject that people were afraid to talk about, because it's going to happen to all of us one day, right? We're all going to die. We're all going to leave this house. And so I think it's important to always have open conversations with your loved ones about what that would look like for you if you had a choice. Now, I don't advocate something funny that I had happen when I worked in a nursing home is I had a lady with a memory deficit, and this was when I was in my 20s, of course, and she wasn't anywhere near dying, okay? She was fully alive, and she wasn't at the end of her journey by any means, but she had this idea that she was going to be euthanized. And she would come to the nurse's station and say, when am I going to be euthanized? Is it my time to be euthanized? And I would just say to her, ma'am, we don't do euthanasia here. And also too, as a hospice nurse, I've had people ask me, if I can speed up the process, if I am speeding up the process. And I think that the important thing to realize is that death's going to happen when it happens. There's nothing that you're going to do really, if you're doing what you're supposed to do, that's going to speed up the process. That's a misconception about hospice, which is a totally other conversation, that hospice speeds up the process, but we don't. The medicines that are given at end of life for comfort really just give comfort. They don't enhance the process, they don't make it speed up, and we don't do euthanasia here. And that's where I'm going to end that. Because I think about that lady a lot, asking if she was going to be euthanized. I think about patients who have over the years asked me if the medications would speed things up. And the answer is no, we don't do euthanasia here. I know there's places that do support assisted end of life processes, but generally I've never worked for a company like that, and that's not my thing. And so I always think about that when patients ask me about that, and that's just a big part of education about the death and dying process and the comfort care process at the end of life, if you get to have that process as well. So I'll leave you with, we don't do euthanasia here. But what are some experiences that you had with death? Was there anything that shocked you? Anything that made you want to not do it again? What are some good experiences that you had? If you want to tell me about your experiences, I'd love to hear about them in the comments. And I thank you for watching, and I hope you come again. And if you like hearing about my journey and my stories, then please consider liking, subscribing, and following. Bye-bye.